Welcome to the Somatic Coaching Academy podcast with Ani and Brian. Join us as we explore the art and science of trauma-sensitive somatic practices and tools to strengthen your practice as a coach, therapist, or holistic professional. Master the art of motivating even the most challenging clients when you'll understand how to tap into and unlock your client's complete holistic intelligence. If you want to learn the most cutting-edge, research-supported skills for personal and professional mastery, you've come to the right place. Let's get this conversation started.
Hello, and welcome to this week's episode of the Somatic Coaching Academy podcast. This week, art and science are sitting in for Brian and Ani. This is episode number 22. I am science. Art, I noticed that you seem tired or exhausted.
Oh, science, I'm just so unmotivated to do this. Do we have to do a podcast today?
This is a very interesting topic, Art, because today's topic is the art and science of being a motivation coach.
Well, I could certainly use some motivation coaching. I'm just not feeling it.
What would you like to experience during our time together today on this podcast, Art?
What would I like to experience? Well, I'd like to feel motivated to do it. Right now, I don't feel motivated to do it. I would like to feel excited about this conversation. I would like to feel like we're creating art together, science. But right now, meh, I got nothing.
So perhaps we can talk about the science of motivation and then extrapolate from there.
That sounds terrible. But you know what I would like? I would like some stimulating conversation. So maybe if you tell me a little bit about the science, then I'll understand a little bit more about what's going on. And I can figure out how to create motivation from there. See, now I'm feeling a little bit better about it already.
Excellent. To be a motivation coach, Ani, it's important to understand both the psychological and physiological underpinnings of motivation. And there is one primary element in the body, one primary neurotransmitter, one primary neuromodulator in the body that controls motivation.
What's that, science?
Dopamine.
Did you just call me a dope?
Amine.
What do you mean, dopamine?
Dopamine. Dopamine is a neurotransmitter, neuromodulator in the body that is the substrate of epinephrine. Epinephrine is a hormone in the body that creates our activation levels. Think about going out and seeking and getting and activating.
I'm thinking about creating art. I'm thinking about being in my studio right now. And that sounds exciting.
Dopamine.
I like dopamine.
Very fascinating. There are 5 primary circuits, dopamine circuits in the brain. We'll talk about 3 today.
Okay. But what about the other 2?
We don't need those right now for what we're talking about.
Okay.
Talk about these 3. So we have the nigrostriatal pathway, which has to do with
bless you.
Movement.
Okay.
Movement, the body actually moving.
Why are you mooing?
Moving, because if we think about the word motivation, part of it is about movement.
Moving.
The Asian part, motivation. The
Asian's about the motion?
That's right. So the nigrostriatal pathway, there's dopamine injected in that pathway that gets us moving as humans.
Yeah, see, that's when we started the episode. I just didn't even feel like moving at all. And then I started moving my body a little bit. I started feeling a little bit better. Is that what you're talking about?
That's what I'm talking about.
I was moving my dopamine?
No, there's other pathways involved too. The mesolimbic and mesocortical pathways.
Okay.
So these are pathways linking key areas in the deep midbrain, nucleus accumbens, into the limbic system. We think about the thalamus, the hypothalamus, the amygdala, and then also projections into the prefrontal cortex. So the mesolimbic pathway, as far as motivation, has to really do with our basic human needs: hunger, thirst, reproduction. And our cortical
and art.
And perhaps debatable, coming to it.
What? Okay.
And our mesocortical pathway, which sends projections into our prefrontal cortex, which has to do with how we categorize, label, and also context-driven motivation.
Like perception?
Meaning.
How we make meaning.
Motivation. Motive.
Motivation.
Motivation. What is motive? Motive is our reason.
I feel like you're hypnotizing me.
Motivation. So our motivation is our reason for moving. The reasoning part of our brain is our prefrontal cortex, informed through the mesolimbic and mesocortical pathways associated with our dopamine projection. Projections come from those areas. Dopamine is released and activating in those parts of the brain. And also the Asian part is, again, from the movement pathway.
Science, this sounds a lot like sensation-based motivation coaching.
Tell me more, Art.
Well, I mean, sensation-based motivation coaches, first of all, they use motion and movement as a part of how they coach people. And they talk to people about what they want to move towards. But one interesting thing, as I'm thinking about it, is as a sensation-based motivation coach, we help people to actually extract the meaning that they're making from the sensations that they're feeling. Because if we put both of those things together, we're talking about emotions, which are so exciting and fun. But I'll have to be honest with you, science. Sometimes emotions are kind of hard to navigate because they feel like something, but they have all of these stories and meanings that I'm attaching to what I'm feeling in my body. And it's so much easier to get the things that I want in my life and feel like a success when I can take those sensations and the meaning I'm making from them and extract them. So I'm dealing with two different things: the sensations and the meaning.
Wonderfully said, Art.
Oh, thank you.
Art, I'm curious, how are you feeling now compared to the beginning of our podcast?
I feel inspired.
Excellent. I have a chart here to describe. Here is a chart of the dopamine release circuits, not circuits. Time and dopamine
continuum
graph.
Okay.
On this side of the graph, you can see dopamine. So more dopamine as it rises. Here, more time as it goes out this way.
I can feel my dopamine.
You can feel your dopamine, yes. So there's a we all have a baseline of dopamine indicated by this dotted line, That's the baseline of dopamine. Think about the baseline of dopamine as the dopamine reservoir. We all have a dopamine reservoir. Dopamine is created very slowly, but can be used very quickly.
So why sometimes I feel like I have a dip?
Remember this point. Yes, that's absolutely right.
Okay.
This is the way our dopamine activity works, Art. When we desire something, when we want something, think about this from an anthropological perspective. Ancient human wanting food.
A sandwich?
A sandwich, needing a sandwich. Desiring a sandwich. Now that desire for the sandwich, that visioning of that wanting that sandwich will give an initial dopamine burst, followed by an immediate dopamine drop below baseline.
Why?
The same area of the brain, the nucleus accumbens and amygdala, have connections with sharing responsibilities for both experiences of pleasure and pain.
Is that like wanting the sandwich and not having the sandwich?
Exactly. We can only ever experience pleasure and pain at the same time. in our brains. That's the way our brain operates.
Our brain can only experience pleasure and pain at the same time?
Dr. Anna Lemke, in her book, Dopamine Nation, describes a mechanism in our brain, whereas as soon as we experience a dopamine output, we immediately experience a dopamine drop, and that drop is experienced as pain, not necessarily physical pain, but the pain of craving.
I know that pain. I do crave things.
The pain of craving. So we have an initial desire to have something. Immediately thereafter, we have a drop in dopamine below the baseline. Any drop below the baseline is experienced as pain of craving, of wanting. Now, that pain of craving, of wanting, then causes us to do what? To seek.
You're very passionate, science.
To seek the thing. The cookie. Say, I think I want a cookie, but there's no cookie in my immediate area. I decide I must have the cookie, so I move my body. And that movement, I get a shot of dopamine through my movement pathway and through the meaning pathway, and I get a massive spike of dopamine as I eat the cookie.
Science, what happened to my sandwich?
We're eating a cookie.
Oh, no, we're on cookies.
We go to a spike. We go to a large spike of dopamine here. Now, once we have that cookie, immediately we drop back down into the trough.
Is that because the cookie's gone?
That's because, well, there is actually there's actually a process called prediction indices that we can go into very briefly. Here, I'll talk about it like this.
Okay.
Actually, what happens, Art, is I want the cookie. I don't have the cookie. I must have the cookie. I seek the cookie. Now, if the cookie is the best cookie I've ever had in my entire life, I get a higher peak of dopamine.
That sounds great.
If the cookie is just an okay cookie, I have just a little peak in dopamine.
Okay.
If the cookie is a terrible cookie, I might not get any peak at all. I might stay in a trough and want something else.
Like a sandwich?
Like a sandwich. Here's the thing to remember. Every peak in dopamine is followed by a proportional dip in dopamine below the baseline. We can never have pleasure without pain.
That reminds me of cross-mapping, science.
Talk to me, Art.
When we do cross-mapping, we hold and experience the undesired and the desired sensations at the same time.
In just a little bit, we'll get to why that's important.
Okay.
Now back to my lesson.
Okay. I'm still very amused by your lesson. I like your chart.
Thank you. So we drop down below. Now, in repeated cases of dopamine peaks again and again and again, we actually keep drawing down the reservoir of dopamine. Remember, dopamine fills slower than it's used oftentimes. It's like a savings account, Art. Have you ever had your savings account and then bought a little something and then had to recover that amount of money back into your savings account again, but then you spend a lot of money and then you're way down in the well again and have a hard time managing the amount of money in the savings account?
Yeah, it's so much harder because I don't have the money in there and then I've got to put a lot more money in there.
Right. So extended periods of dopamine spikes that are associated with addiction or addictive tendencies, dopaminergic behaviors, will cause a very slow return to baseline, and it could alter the baseline, lowering it at a chronic level, causing chronic depression, chronic exhaustion.
That happens
for a longer period of time because we have lowered our reservoir of dopamine.
That happens to artists quite a bit.
I know.
I know. Some of my friends.
Not the scientists, though.
No, you don't have dopamine, do you?
I release dopamine every 3 to 4 seconds in my brain, just like you do. Now, certain things will increase that activation, such as seeking a cookie or a sandwich.
Or a chai tea latte.
Or whatever it is that you desire.
Thank you.
But the idea here is, over time, if a motivation coach can help a client raise their baseline level of dopamine over time, the person will have more sustainable motivation and be able to experience relatively large peaks of motivation without draining their dopamine reservoir.
Well, hey, science, this reminds me of, can I see your chart? Can I hold it? Thank you.
Be careful with it.
Okay. This reminds me of when people go to see motivational speakers.
Hold it like this. Hold it appropriately.
Hey, but you hold it. It reminds me of when people go to see motivational speakers, science, and they're like, yes, I can do it. And then they get home and then they feel like this because they don't have the motivation that they had when they were in front of the motivational speaker. But as a motivation coach, I think that I would like to help my clients to be able to, like you said, have more dopamine in their reservoir and savings in their savings account, both of those things, so that they don't go through all the ups and downs and ups and downs and ups and downs. And so they don't need me to help them to get up and get down too, that they can do it themselves.
If I was a motivation coach, that's what I would like to do as well. I am simply a mere scientist that brings the science and physiology.
Makes charts.
Make charts.
This is a very nice chart, science.
Thank you, Art.
Did you say you had another one?
That's a compliment, Art, coming from you, knowing that you're an artist.
Well, look at the lines. They're actually, did you use a ruler? You did. I can see.
Of course I did. I'm a scientist.
Did you say you had another chart to show me?
I do not.
Oh, but you told me you were going to show me how to do cross mapping or something.
Oh, we're getting there.
Oh, okay. Okay.
We're now at the part of the program where it's important to start talking about how does a motivation coach help someone to increase their reservoir of dopamine.
Okay. I hope that it has something to do with plunging in cold water.
That is actually one very powerful way to enhance someone's dopamine level.
I was kind of kidding. It's not my favorite thing in the world. Are there any other options?
There are other options.
Okay, few.
Yes.
Like what?
Somatic practices can help someone elevate their levels of dopamine.
I love teaching somatic practices because I get to really use my creativity. There's so many different ways to like mix it up, of course, following the process, but so that I can watch what's happening with my clients and feel what's happening in my own body and really lead them through a beautiful experience.
Yes.
And it's really helpful. And then the clients tell me they can do all kinds of stuff because they've regulated their nervous system.
Yeah. So a successful motivation coach needs to know how to do somatic practices with their clients in order to help them elevate their overall levels of resting dopamine.
What else?
Abstaining, Art.
From cookies?
From cookies.
Chai tea lattes? I hope not.
From chai tea lattes.
No.
From social media.
Abstaining
from dopaminergic behaviors that create exhaustive peaks again and again and again. What we might call addictive behaviors.
That's really hard for people.
Very difficult for people. A motivation coach can be helpful in weaving in part of their program to help someone pull away from or abstain from activities that consistently drain their dopamine. Social media is a very powerful one, but also different drug use, behavior, any addictive tendencies.
That makes sense. I have recently started cleaning up my diet and abstaining from certain things in my diet, and I feel a lot better. Maybe that has something to do with it.
Could very much so. Dopamine is about wanting.
And needing.
That's what it is. Dopamine is about wanting. Dopamine raises with anticipation. Can you feel when you anticipate something?
I'm feeling it right now.
Like?
I love that feeling.
That's the dopamine.
I want it. I need it. I love it.
And then what happens when you don't get it?
Oh, crash.
Exactly.
Yeah, I don't like the crash, but I do like the wanting and the needing.
Something interesting happens when we abstain from dopaminergic behaviors, thusly elevating our resting level of dopamine. What then occurs is that after the abstaining period, abstination period, even
I made that word up.
Small dopamine activities help us feel wonderful without spiking the system, because each spike Dopamine always wants more dopamine, first of all. The other thing is the amount of pleasure that we experience is directly related in relationship to the amount of dopamine that we have in our system just before and just after the experience. Cited by this study, when someone is given a salty or sweet food that they really enjoy, and they rank it on a scale of 0 to 10 of the most enjoyable salty or sweet food that they've had, and then immediately afterwards have an even saltier or sweeter or more savory food that they rank higher on that scale, when they come back and taste the first food again, they rank it lower than they did the first time.
That's very interesting science.
So with each dopamine spike, to feel even better, we need even a higher dopamine spike, which is
so we keep needing more and more.
We keep needing more and more and more of that thing to experience perceptively the same amount of pleasure. So when we go back to baseline and we elevate our baseline, then even small things like a walk in the woods
would sounds lovely.
Be very, very, feel very pleasurable and very wonderful, as compared to previously that same amount of pleasure would have been needed from the sweetest, most amazing cookie you could have ever experienced.
You know, I can see science, how this would really help not just people, but like everybody, like our whole society, because it seems like our whole society is all about these highs and these lows and these highs and these lows. And then what people say is, what I'd really love is to just feel very happy about things like a walk in the park. But they have a really hard time doing that.
Yes. From an evolutionary perspective, people might say our dopamine system, why is it developed this way? Well, if we think about this, millions and millions of years ago, ancient person would have desired food. And food was never just around the corner. It required foraging and hunting and scraping and long travel over mountains and through streams and all those sorts of things to find a very little bit of food. So dopamine was excellent to motivate someone to seek something and have a lot of energy reserves be pushed towards that expenditure to find a small thing and then to consume that thing, only to realize that they were still hungry and they still needed more. Therefore, dopamine then would spike again to cause them to go seek that thing out again. But there was a longer time delay between the immediate wanting and the acquiring. So if we go back to the chart, here's the immediate wanting of ancient man. The food that they would find was way over here. There's a longer time. Might take hours or even days to find water or find food. But nowadays, everything's instantaneous.
So I think that's interesting because we still have so many aspects of our physiology and our body and our emotions that were put in place because the ancient human needed them. But now things are way different.
Completely different. We live in a world of abundance, saturation of dopaminergic options.
I see that science. Thank you.
And so a motivation coach can be helpful working with their client to help reorient their day and their habits to create better baseline reservoir filling activities, such as somatic practices, but you also jumped ahead, Art, as you do.
My intuition is spot on.
Unruly you are.
I am, aren't I?
That one of the most powerful things a motivation coach can help a client do is to practice experiencing both the pleasure of reward along with experiencing discomfort, because this balances the dopamine lever in the brain. The more we have to remember, the more we press down on the dopamine side, the more pain we experience. The more we press down on the pain side, the more dopamine we refill our systems with. So to experience them simultaneously helps us to both experience the pleasure of reward along with an elevating of our dopamine levels.
I think this is such an interesting conversation because I don't think a lot of people know this science. And if they did, they'd probably do things very differently with their clients.
I agree, Art.
I think this is something that if, people knew ahead of time, they might want the spikes. They might want the thing. They want the wanting. But when they find out about this reservoir thing, I think that actually is what people are really trying to get at.
I agree, Art.
That was very well done, science. I learned a lot today.
How do you feel after our podcast experience today, Art?
I actually feel really inspired. I think I will go out and perhaps write some poetry or maybe get some things done on my to-do list. I feel really good. Thank you.
You're most welcome, Art.
And I feel motivated to help more people because I know that I can use my artistic and creative aspects to create somatic practices and motivation coaching to be able to help people to not just get the things that they want, but feel good along the way. And that feels really good.
Excellent, Art.
Thank you, science. Hey, did you hear we've been invited to be guest faculty at the Somatic Coaching Academy?
I did receive a sealed letter earlier today informing me to that fact.
I was just wondering, what are you going to be teaching?
Science.
Oh, of course. You want to know what I'm teaching?
What are you teaching, Art?
Thanks for asking, science. I'll be teaching whatever I want.
Of course. And thank you for joining us today for this episode of the Somatic Coaching Academy podcast. I'm Science.
And I'm Art. We will see you the next time.
Farewell.
Bye.
Thank you for listening to this episode. We hope that this conversation will help you improve your practice and change the way you think about your work, your clients, and yourself. Continue your exploration of trauma-sensitive somatic coaching by listening to more podcast episodes at somaticcoachingacademy.com. You could be the trusted guide that people turn to help them with their most challenging situations and to reach their most precious goals. Thank you for joining us. We'll see you next time.